Hey, welcome back everyone to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 211, Geopolitics. Please click the like button as you come in. Share the video if possible. There's a document in the description beneath the video for you to follow along with. Complex design, what's going on? I'll give you guys another 60 seconds before you come in there before we get started. We're starting late because had to set up the Brain Trust again. It was we're running a different format now, so. Make some adjustments here. See how this works. Okay, I see people coming in now, so I'll give you guys another 30 seconds before we get started. Please click the like button as you come in. Share the video if possible. Docket and description beneath the video for you to follow along with. Same as always. All right, let me get started. I won't wait for you guys any longer. Let's see. We have a shorter docket than usual, so it's a new format. All right, let's get started. Davateo, what's going on? All right, so first item on the docket from TheGuardian.com. Bolsonaro supporters take to Brazil's streets as approval ratings drop. Hardcore devotees of Brazil's far-right president, Jair Bolsonaro, have taken to the streets across the country in their first major show of force since his landslide election victory last October. Wake up, Brazilian people. Today is the day to march. Carla Zambelli, a prominent Bolsonarista congresswoman, tweeted as supporters of the radical populists began gathering on Sunday morning. Pro-Bolsonaro rallies were reported in more than 300 towns and cities, including Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, Brasilia, and Juiz Fora, where Bolsonaro was stabbed on the eve of his election, although many of the demonstrations appeared small. Flag-waving Bolsonaristas also turned out to protest in the Amazon, a region activists fear could suffer irreversible damage under a leader notorious for his hostility to the environment. Bolsonaro is not alone, okay? He has never been, tweeted Eder Moro, a pro-Bolsonaro congressman from the Amazon city of Belém. Fernando Sampaio, a Bolsonaro activist who led a demonstration in the southeastern city of Atibra, said he was marching in support of the leader he believed could rid Brazil of thieving politicians and crime. For me, having a president of the republic who isn't corrupt is already a massive victory for our country, Sampaio said. Bolsonaro did not take part in the controversial mobilization, which critics have slammed as a dangerous attempt to radicalize supporters and bully Brazil's democratic institutions into backing the president's plans. But he tweeted his approval, sharing cell phone video of the rallies with his 4.3 million followers. today is the day that the people are taken to the streets to defend the future of the nation. Bolsonaro told reporters that attending a church service in Rio, where protesters marched down uh, Capanana, Copacabana beach, where Trumpian caps reading "Make Brazil Great Again." This is interesting. It's interesting to see that people are saying that this guy, he's going to clean up the corruption. In reality, this guy is corrupt.
Isn't that how it usually works, Mike? What's
Yeah.
going on, everyone?
Wait, what's going on, dude? Um, this guy is working with Israel. He's working with, against Venezuela. Um, he's backing up Trump, and he's been, a staunch advocate of taking away land from the indigenous population. I don't see how this guy can be any cleaner than, let's say, any of the corruption that he's talking about. He is the corruption.
I was gonna say, didn't this dude jail his rival?
Oh yeah,
His rival's in jail right now, right?
right.
Yeah. So I mean, that's what I mean. He kind of like gangstered his way in. It was sort of like any kind of democratic processes that may have kind of pushed back against how he got into the presidency. Well, he nullified that by jailing his opposition.
Hmm.
That was the first thing. I also recall there was that sister that was there who was basically I don't even want to call it social justice type of individual who was very pro Afro Brazilians,
Oh,
like
you
all
mean?
of the melanated.
Oh, I think you're
Go
talking about
ahead.
Dilma Rousseff.
Yeah, her, and then they took her out.
Yep.
Right, right. So it's like I think from the onset of this dude coming into power in Brazil, all you've seen is like the you've seen sort of like the mirrored corruption that he talked about that the other regimes had been carrying out in Brazil. This dude's come in and it's just been like one right hook after the next. You know what I mean? And
Right.
it's like
Right.
I haven't seen anything from this dude that suggests that he's not as corrupt, if so more, than the people he displaced.
Right. Right. So if he stays in power long enough, which I highly doubt, because I don't think he can actually help the help Brazil's economy recover. Brazil's economy is not doing too well. Even China pretty much did not want to do business with him. They brought the vice president instead.
I was gonna say, what is the what's been that take? Because Brazil is the B in the BRICS. So how is that that relationship going with
It's
China
not
and Brazil?
it's not the BRICS anymore. It's just it's just China and Russia for the most part.
There you go. Dollar Will D, what's going on?
Evening, Mike and Ulysses.
Hey, what's going on, bro?
Okay,
All
you
right.
guys are on point about Bolsonaro. He's
Yeah.
trying his best to pull back everything that was done before him, and
Hmm.
the U.S. is helping. The U.S. is helping. The U.S. is the one who took out the lady president.
Hmm.
Obama had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up because a quick backstory for those listening in the chat, 30 seconds, real quick. The NSA, U.S. government used the NSA to spy on the Brazilian president, um, Dilma Rousseff, at the time, through a company, state-run company, oil company called Petrobras, which is Petro Brazil. They hacked the infrastructure of the Petrobras to reveal alleged corruption of Dilma Rousseff to get her overthrown to break up the BRICS. And they used that information in a campaign against her to put her ass in jail. Um, Dilma Rousseff, again, backstory, was a freedom fighter in the 1970s against the Brazilian regime at the time. I forget the name of the president now, or the leadership regime back in the 1970s. But she was jailed as a terrorist, and in fact, the United States government actually had her on a terrorist list. And she came to power after being released out of jail. Well, she didn't come to power, but she started when she was released out of jail. She actually came into politics that way and ran for office in mid 2000s and actually won, which is what got her into power. So she went from being labeled as a terrorist to being the president of of one of the largest and strongest countries in Latin America, which gives a lot of hope to a lot of people in Latin America that they were supposed to be a turning of the Monroe Doctrine, that it was no longer the U.S.'s backyard. You had uprisings in Nicaragua, Honduras, Venezuela with Chavez. You had Cuba, who was a strong supporter of all of these newly formed socialist governments that put a thorn in the side of the United States. The United States cannot enter Latin American discussions of OAS, which is Organization of American States, because if Cuba was not allowed, then the U.S. was not allowed, which kept the U.S. out and brought Cuba in and created this sort of strong backbone of Latin America, which is why they had to overthrow Dilma Rousseff. They had to get rid of, cause turmoil inside Venezuela. They had to cause turmoil with the Bolivian president. Again, quick backstory. The Bolivian president went to Russia a few years ago and to visit the Russian president. They were under the impression that Edward Snowden was on his plane. They brought down the president of Bolivia. They brought his plane down in Europe with NATO. In world history, that has never happened. A president's plane has ever been brought down by the military of another country. By default, that's a declaration of war. And what that did was they didn't find Edward Snowden on the plane, just an FYI. What that did was it forced all of Latin America to come together and kept the United States out until Trump came into office. So that goes to show you, the fragility of Latin of American and Latin American relations and how easily they can actually be thwarted.
Now you said that happened with the president of Bolivia. That's Evo Morales, right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. For y'all, if y'all want to know why that happened, look into who that dude is.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
because he's an indigenous an indigenous Bolivian who came to power, and he's a lot like a Hugo Chavez in a lot of ways, where he's about basically nationalizing the assets of Bolivia for the benefit of the indigenous people.
Yep. He came to power because of the selling off of Bolivia's national assets. Because the people who bought, especially the water, it started with the water wars when the French company and charged more for the water, and the poor people couldn't afford to buy the water.
Right. I forget which American company it was. I'm not sure if it was Poland Spring or some other company that was involved in that.
No, it was a French company. The same company owned Perrier, I think, but it was a French company.
Okay. Total?
I forgot the name of the company, but it's all, you gotta understand, the water companies are all interlocked.
Mm-hmm.
And they're part of the World Bank. The World Bank got this program that what they're doing is they're going into nations and say, okay, we will give you, if you say, the other day they tried to do it to Tanzania, as a matter of fact. They tried to push the Tanzanian economy down so that they could go in and buy up the resources. They try to make it look as though the economy in Tanzania was failing. And the president came out and, I mean, knocked down the report that they produced really hard, and they started backing up. But that's what they do. They go into a country and they destroy the economy, and then they buy off the assets like the water company, electric companies, gas companies, and all that.
That's what they
And
did
then,
in.
go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say that that's what they did in Greece, and that's why Greece is a mess. They tried the same thing in Russia in the 90s, which is what brought Putin back to power, or brought Putin to the forefront of power. And they, the people were begging Putin to actually stop this madness that was going on. American investors were having a field day with Russian assets on the ground, and they picked the country apart like a carcass, like a vulture does a carcass on the ground. So that's what brought Putin to power, and like you said, that's what brought Morales to power in Bolivia. The more these some of foreign policies get pushed, the more it brings radical players to the table, such as such as Chavez. Chavez came to power the same exact way. Dilma Rousseff came to power the same exact way. I believe they lifted, 1 million people out of poverty in Brazil during her time, which is a lot. You can't even do that in the United States. If we got 20 people watching, only 14 likes. Please hit the like button if you're not going to participate in the chat. All right, let me get to this next one. Next item on the docket is from Moscow Times. Russia rejects new Monroe Doctrine of U.S. in Latin America, says Lavrov. United States' new foreign policy approach in Latin America goes against international law, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said after talks with his Cuban counterpart. U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton has invoked the 1823 policy established by then-President James Monroe to warn other countries, including Russia and Cuba, against interfering in Venezuela. The Monroe Doctrine is widely seen in Latin America as a justification for U.S. armed intervention in the region. We spoke about Washington's attempts to reshape the region as it wills in the spirit of a revived Monroe Doctrine, Lavrov told reporters Monday following talks with Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez. We naturally reject such approaches and will firmly define the norms and principles of the UN Charter, he said. The U.S. and most other Western countries have thrown their backing behind Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido, who in January invoked the Constitution to declare himself interim president, arguing that President Nicolas Maduro's 2018 re-election was illegitimate. Russia and China support Maduro, who has said Guaido is a puppet of Washington. Maduro retains control of the state functions and loyalty of the country's military. Venezuela's economic crisis, which has caused shortages of food and medicine, has pushed millions of people to flee the country. The Russian foreign minister had earlier on Monday said that Moscow was ready to play a role in talks between the Venezuelan government and opposition in Oslo. However, it warned against any external powers trying to foist ultimatums on the Venezuelan leadership. So, the Monroe Doctrine. Quick synopsis on the Monroe Doctrine for those of you listening don't know what it is. Monroe Doctrine basically says that everything in Latin America and the Caribbean belongs to the United States and no one else can enter. This is a very shaky doctrine because what they're doing in the South China Sea, the United States, and what they're doing in the Black Sea, in the Northern Sea, in Russia's backyard, contradicts the Monroe Doctrine. So what's happening here is that when the United States established this in 1823, other countries were pretty weak back then. But now, over 150 years later, most countries can defend themselves in one way, shape, or form. I mean, you're not just going to walk into any country and knock them down. I don't care what country it is; they'll put up a fight against you. Whether they're throwing rocks or they're picking up, Kalashnikovs, they can fight. We see this happening in Yemen.
I mean, this notion that doctrine sort of trumps a group of people's will to exist, right? It's as if it's just like I lay down because you have a doctrine. That doctrine's real funny, and I think that we're starting to find ourselves in a geopolitical situation where a lot of these doctrines of world hegemony is being tested right about now.
Mr. D. All right, I think D.E.'s away.
You might have stepped away for a sec.
Oh, sorry. Look, the U.S. is actually really lucky that the Chinese and the Russians don't want to push the U.S. out of the leadership role in the world. Otherwise, they can, and not. They can bring the U.S. like in Iraq. They could have kept the U.S. fighting in Iraq for another 10 years. They could have kept the U.S. fighting in Syria for another 10 years. The Russians didn't have to go in any major way. All they had to do was provide enough arms for the Syrian government to keep on fighting, and then stir up, people in Iraq to start fighting again, people in Afghanistan to start fighting again, and then the Chinese in the Far East could bring to bear their on the Philippines, on Taiwan, on Japan. When they start stressing the U.S., that's money that they have to spend to defend. But these nations don't really. If people really pay attention to this, they'll see that it's not that the Russians are not against us, because that's every nation has to protect its interests, but they can go further than what they're doing right now. If you look at it carefully, they can. So the Monroe Doctrine, they can actually use that to further destabilize the U.S. I mean, all they have to do is go to Nicaragua, other nations beside Colombia, Guatemala. When they start causing problems there, the people from there are going to leave the country and head for the U.S. border. So the Russians are not really doing these things. So
Wait, and we're talking about a 19th century doctrine, right? This doctrine didn't really take into account the multivariate ways that war can be waged in the 21st century. Let's just take into, and I don't want to digress because maybe Mike, we might touch on this maybe on the free or on the free chat part of the hangout here. But when China or someone like a China can basically threaten to pull your supply of rare earth metals, right? Which is sort of like a necessary instrument in your high-tech industries. Okay, like you can stack your doctrine of global hegemony up against something like that, and it does force you to reconsider.
Yeah, the rare earth metals actually used in some of these, in majority of their, their not naval ships, their submarines and their satellites and their aircraft. So tanks, not so much. Tanks have not really gone hybrid yet. I know Russia has a hybrid tank that's out. Well, it was in testing last summer. So the tank is actually silent when it's in EV mode, so it basically can creep around,
right,
without putting out a thermal footprint. So it makes it stealth.
I mean, I'm just saying, I'm just trying to point out how, like, a doctrine from that time, right, which
Mm-hmm.
doesn't consider some of the complexities of modern times, right? We still rely on these old doctrines, right? We still use these as a legal basis, a basis for our defense policies, for example. And I'm saying these are 19th century policies. And when you fast forward to today's time and we still rely on those old policies, man, they kind of bump up with where the other people. Okay, so when those doctrines were created, these policies was put in place, there was a certain view that the United States had of the people of these other countries that it basically moved to dominate and to bring into the Commonwealth. But shit changes, right? We still take the same approach with this doctrine, but things change, and I mean that's kind of where you see the cognitive dissonance in all of this.
Mm-hmm. All right, this next one is from Reuters.com. U.S. boycotts UN arms for forum as Venezuela takes chair. The United States walked out of the conference on disarmament on Tuesday to protest against Venezuela assuming the rotating presidency of the UN-sponsored forum, as it did a year ago when Syria took the chair. U.S. Ambassador and President of the Conference on Disarmament, Robert Wood. Haven't heard of this brother before. The Trump administration, which has stepped up sanctions against the government of Nicolas Maduro, has not ruled out military action to remove what it and dozens of other nations consider an illegitimate government that rigged a 2018 election. As Venezuela took up the 1 month presidency of Geneva talks, U.S. Disarmament Ambassador Robert Wood left the session and announced a boycott, while Maduro Ambassador Jorge Valero chairs it. We have to try to do what we can to prevent these types of states from presiding over international bodies, Wood told reporters. Clearly, when you have regimes like the Bashar and Assad regime, Assad regime and the Maduro regime presiding over the body, there is something fundamentally wrong with how we are conducting our business, and we need to examine that, he said. A representative of Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido, the interim leader, should assume the seat, which says Latin American delegations, including Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, who also recognized Guaido, stayed away from the conference. Syria and Russia denounced what they called its politicization. Valero condemned the move. We regret that the representative of the United States and its docile allies continue to bring to this forum matters that are outside the mandate of the CD, he told the news briefing. It's not a forum for coup mongering. More than $4.5 billion in Venezuela's assets have been frozen or confiscated under U.S. Led sanctions that are crippling vital imports of food and medicines, Valero said. Valero added. Maduro maintains control over Venezuela's state institutions, calls Guaido a puppet of Washington, and blames U.S. sanctions for hyperinflation, economic meltdown, and humanitarian crisis. I always find it interesting. It doesn't look that much different than ABL. I always find it interesting that they have this sort of idea that he's such a dictator. And I always scratch my head and say, what about this guy in Saudi Arabia? You don't call him a dictator? I mean, they just chopped up the body of a foreign what was supposed to be a foreign national in a embassy. How come there's no UN board against that?
That's a good question, man. Shit. I've always wondered the same. I mean, how do you apparently there's a thin line, right? That either makes you a respected global leader or terrorist, right? Dictator. I'm thinking it may just have to do with, geopolitical ties, right? Which is what's going to, in the eyes of the U.S. anyway, is going to determine whether they view you favorably or not.
Hmm.
I don't think it's. I don't think it. I don't think it's. I don't think it's intrinsically tied to the individual themselves. I think it's more or less tied to how willing is this individual willing to tie its assets up with the United States. If you're not willing to do that, we don't look at you favorably.
Hmm.
You're not a friendly. You don't have friendly nation status with us. You're not a global partner. I'm trying to think of all the colloquialisms that are used to describe other nations that aren't as powerful, and because of this, they're more compliant and more malleable to U.S. policy.
Hmm. Hey, we got 40 people watching and only 20 likes. If you're not gonna participate in the chat, please hit the like button.
MOT, what's good, sir?
If Paul were here, he could give you the history of this going all the way back to MI6. As a matter of fact, going all the way back to Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes was a master at doing this. I don't know if you guys know African history and the old British colonial system. They would install somebody, and that was their man. And a lot, even some of the James Bond movies are referred to it as our man and so in such a country or such and such a place. And the same thing, America just took up that after World War II, transplanted Allen Dulles, just brought it from MI6 right into the U.S. That's
I mean,
that's
don't they refer to those people as Rhodes Scholars?
well, most of them have been educated before. It used to be in England, and they will get a scholarship called the Rhodes Scholarship to go to either London School of Economics or Cambridge or Oxford, and then on to the British Military Academy. And a lot of them went through a lot of the well, trying to think of my own country, Barbados. They are Rhodes Scholars now. The two of the presidents, the two of the late presidents of the United States, Clinton and Gore, both of them were trained in London for the job of president of the United States.
Yep.
And
Both
you
of
do
them.
realize Cory Booker is a Rhodes Scholar as well.
Oh yeah. And there was what was a congressman. I can't remember his name now, but he used to go around the country and choose males that he would choose these people, give them pay their scholarship, and either at Chicago, School of Chicago, where our favorite black president went, um, or Oxford.
Hmm. All right, this next one is from Quartz.com. Liberians, like librarians, Liberians are worried their country is sliding into economic uncertainty under President Wade. In Monrovia's relatively upscale Sinker neighborhood, a ragged rope stretched across a street side late one recent night. A 20-something man is in a scrappy shirt and shorts, sidled up, sidled up to a car. Cold water, my man. He raised. He said, using the local euphemism for a bribe, "Let me a drink." He was easily brushed off this time, but checkpoints like this are a sign of this country's descent into hunger, desperation, and uncertainty not seen for more than a decade. Just over a year into the administration of George Way, or Weah, I think it's Wee, a former world soccer superstar turned president, the economy is in spiral. Staggering mismanagement and corruption have scared off foreign investors. Frustrated donors are withholding funds. The Liberian dollar has dropped by a third against the U.S. dollar since we took office. Inflation has soared as high as 28%. For Liberians, the checkpoints are a reminder of the dark days of Liberia's 14-year civil war that ended with the exile of President Charles Taylor in 2003. Fighters, sometimes as young as 8, ruled over checkpoints like this, meting out life, torture, death with a terrifying capriciousness. More than 250,000 people were killed, 90,000 of the economy was obliterated. The country is on edge in the run-up to major protests on June 7th called Save the State, Monrovia and Washington, D.C., with hunger rising and a growing number of vigilantes taking justice into their own hands. There is a fear that June 7th could ignite bloodshed. Parties are in feverish negotiations to ensure peace, but Liberians are stocking up on food and radios. Many say they will stay away from the stay away, but others, often those who voted Weah, who are determined to go. Leroy Wito, tire repairer in Monrovia, has placed a placard ready. Mr. President, please listen to us. There's a variety of reasons as to why Africa is having these sort of issues of starvation when they have all this land to actually plant, food and industry here. This is being done from the outside. It's not being done from the inside. Obviously, the president gets to eat, and the members of parliament get to eat 3 times a day. But you have a population that is starving. You have to start to question, who's the minister of agriculture, who is the, minister of education, all these other people. Somebody's behind this from the outside. It's not so much of an internal issue, because if your population is starving, and your economy is sliding into chaos, you have members of parliament that are supposed to assess this type of stuff. Minister of Finance, Minister of Education, Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Technology. Where are all these people at? DE, you have anything you want to add to this?
To me, is the old play in Africa, where they put somebody in power in Africa, and this person comes in and destroy the country. The World Bank and IMF comes in, and then they sell off everything, and then the country keeps on going downhill from there. It's normal, it's standard. And one of the things that this is, like, to me, one of the obstacles that they're throwing into Africa now that China has decided to really get more active in the economic and social affairs of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
That China is building the infrastructure in Africa, and not all of Africa needs the Chinese. The Chinese have to build infrastructure. They don't have to. Um, uh, if you look at China and say, well, China just needs the raw materials, they can get the raw materials from East Africa and Congo, but they're not East Africa, South Africa, nations south of the Sahara, but don't have to go on the West Coast. What the British and American, French and Germans and EU are doing is kind of setting their foot inside there, destabilizing where they can to keep China from growing in Africa. And therefore, if they keep China from growing and building in Africa, they're going to keep Africa in a position where they have been taking advantage of Africa for the last, I don't know, since 200, 300 years.
Mm-hmm.
This is basically it. They're doing the same thing in Gambia right now. They put this guy named Barrow, who never had anything to do with the government. I mean, he is inept, to put it bluntly, inept. I mean, and they put him in power in Gambia. The other guy that they kicked out, really, he was a thief, yeah. But this guy don't know anything. First thing that they're doing is selling off all the Gambia assets at cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go.
Well, China has a vested interest in stabilizing Africa because that's another billion person economy. What's the value of Africa if there's no human bodies? If there's no Africans to actually spend money on your products, you got to stabilize the environment some way. It has to be stable enough so that they can actually buy your goods if you're going to export them there. So
yeah,
Well, I mean that.
yeah, that's
I'm
true.
sorry. You go.
Yes, that's true. But also, China needs a stable. You said China needs a stable Africa for the other reason that China is overpopulated, and they have to put those Chinese somewhere. So what China is doing is, as it becomes more, um, if the resources is located in Africa, if you are going to you're shipping the resources to China, then you're processing them, making into what you want to export again. Whereas if you build your factory in Africa, so now you have to educate the Africans, or educate more Africans, because a lot of people in Africa are actually educated already. They got degrees, but they can't find work.
mm-hmm.
Anyway, so you gotta educate the Africans, and your people going to Africa gotta have a stable environment, not only for them but for their children that they're gonna have. And you can see, if you look at, there was a complaint the other day about the Chinese community in South Africa having their own police force, but that's part of establishing. You're there to protect your people. You might not. It might come out as being rude, but you have to do it. And America will do it. Look at the green zone in Iraq, and if you look at any place where you have a large community of Americans, you'll see that they put security in there. So you have to stabilize the countries for what you're going to do. If you're going to have people in there working, you're going to build schools, you're going to build hospitals, because you don't want to fly your people to China to go to the hospital. You want to make it in Africa, and that's what Chinese are doing. They have to do it.
Well, I think this is all emblematic of not knowing who your candidates are, not knowing who your presidents are. In a lot of these countries, it's relatively easy for a soccer star to become the goddamn president. I'm not really sure what you learn in soccer, which would then lend you to be the president of a nation, and why that's preferred in a lot of nations. Like, it's always like some ex-soccer player who becomes like the leader of of a country. But when the people elect, when people elect these individuals, and they elect them because of reasons like, well, he scored X amount of goals against, this other country and our rivals in this match, and that made him a national hero. Okay, that has nothing to do with policy. When you ask Mike, where's your finance minister? Where's your technology ministers? Where's your agricultural ministers? Like, how the fuck did this type of stuff happen with these dudes on the job? Well, I mean, did we understand or did we have any inkling or any idea what their plan was once they got the position? You know what I mean? It's like you don't just and this even kind of circles even back around to some of the things that we as black folks experience here in the United States. Like you can't just have like a romanticized view of a person that you're going to be putting in charge with the management of the assets and resources of your nation. You can't be sold on a romantic idea, right? And then entrust that person with these very important items that are essential for, like, the growth and prosperity of a country. I mean, that's something that you take very seriously. We, like, just 20 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, we were talking about who's a damn Rhodes Scholar and who's not. I think that's pretty important to know, because that'll give you some insight as to how they think geopolitically speaking. So if you don't have any inkling, any idea of who your leaders are, just who they are really and who they're aligned with, then you get shit like this.
You see, complex. Just look at George Bush Jr. That's our example of when we run a country. Guess what?
There you
Two
go.
wars and,
There you
and two
go.
wars and $15 trillion.
And the guy was about as clueless as I don't know what.
So
He was even more clueless when the shoes were flying at him.
The Iraqi reporter.
Yeah.
we got our examples too, man. They will put you in there to get their agenda done, no matter who you are. Look at Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, he's falling asleep. Half his memory is gone. That's the way it is, bro.
All right. Next one is from Stratfor. As terrorists settle into the Sahel, West Africa prepares for battle. As global terrorism shifts away from the battlefields in the Middle East, jihadists and other militants, including those affiliated with Al Qaeda and the Islamic State, have begun seeking out unstable regions in sub-Saharan Africa as their next home. The Sahel, a vast space stretching from Mauritania's Atlantic coast to Eritrea, has been particularly vulnerable to this shift due to its perennial tumult and poverty. But now there are signs that the region's militant spell has begun seeping into the West African countries to its south as well, which could have drastic consequences for some of the continent's most prosperous economies, such as the Ivory Coast and Ghana, and their chief military partner, France. Despite years of French military support across the region through Paris's Operation Barkhane strategy, an effective mechanism to improve the increasingly dire situation in the Sahel has yet to emerge. France's Group of Five, G5, Sahel Joint Force, a regional counterterrorism force comprised of roughly 4,000 soldiers from Chad, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, still suffers from the funding and operational setbacks, rendering it essentially ineffective. Meanwhile, multinational efforts to invest in the region flounder and local economies remain either efficient or non-existent. In light of failed regional and international efforts to improve local stability in the Sahel, militant groups, including those affiliated with Al Qaeda and Islamic State, are taking advantage. The security and governance vacuums in Mali's vast north, for example, have offered these groups the room needed to plan and conduct attacks elsewhere in the region, as evidenced in as evidenced by the huge uptick in militant activity in Burkina Faso just south of Mali. This is a map of where the terrorists are roaming back and forth. So from Senegal all the way back into Eritrea, that's the depth of how well that's the width of how far the terrorists are willing to go. In recent
East
years,
to west.
security in east to west. Sorry, in recent years, security in several Burkina Faso provinces, especially in those closest to the Malian border in the north, have gone from precarious to extremely dangerous amid near constant waves of militant attacks on schools, border posts, and security forces. Government security forces in some Sahel countries have also been accused of committing massacres or other war crimes against local civilians, likely destroying any remaining shreds of goodwill between the government and more peripheral populations. But there are now signs that the militants expanding beyond their usual areas of operation continues operations to countries further afield from the Sahel's instability. More recently, two French citizens were kidnapped in uh, Pinjari National Park, located in the far north of Benin, in early May. When French special forces conducted a raid to rescue the two hostages in Burkina Faso, they ended up finding two other hostages from South Korea and the United States who had also been kidnapped. All this instability in one region. Where's the African Union? Where's their solutions? You know, where are all the strong militaries from Egypt and Ethiopia? Where are the strong militaries from South Africa and Zimbabwe? I don't understand what's going on with Africans. Like, why is it so hard to stabilize an area when you have 18 different militaries around that area?
The problem stems from.
Because none of them. Go ahead, D. Go ahead.
Sorry, man. The problem stems. If you look at the area, you'll see that except for Sudan, well, yeah, all of them are French, francophone countries, and Egypt does not consider itself Black African.
Right.
So it doesn't have, and even if it decided it wanted to help get rid of these people that the French are claiming that they're moving into Africa, America and France will not let them do it. The British, French, and America will not let them do it. You have American troops and they're fighting Egyptians in no time. And French troops will be in there fighting Egypt will be labeled a terrorist organization. And Egypt can't afford to have that with the situation going on in Egypt right now. Ethiopia itself cannot fight a war because the economy of Ethiopia is not strong enough to go to go do something like that, and it will take a lot to get rid of area because these people are funded by the French. The same people. This is the same organization that was set up in Syria by the French, set up in Libya by the French, set up in Syria and Libya by the Americans and the Saudis. The Saudis is paying for this. The Saudis' money pays for all of this. All the guns are bought from the U.S. or some arms dealer and shipped there. The French bring the arms in.
Mm-hmm.
This is the way it is. So you got countries that whose armies are not strong enough to fight off these people. Even Nigeria is having a problem with it. You know, so they have Africa has to be strengthened. You know, the nations have to develop the economies and then they can slowly push these people out. But one country, as it stands right now, cannot do it. You have to have you have to take like South Africa, probably Uganda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia combined force to just take the time, 3-4 years with the backing of some major power that has air power, you know, like Russia, like what Russia did
In
in
Syria.
Syria. They have to have that kind of backing to go in and clean out these people that the French armed and sent into Africa.
Well, you know, well, I mean, and D, I'm glad I let you speak. I wanted you to speak first because I just I knew you were going to go there. I just want to actually follow up on what you're talking about. I mean, this is basically just, you know, what happens when you can't establish diplomatic ties amongst your own neighbors, right? You do, and I mean, God, you can go back into the annals of history just to see how much warring and fighting has taken place on the continent. But you know, you when once you partner with someone of another nation who's of a completely different continent, okay, there's trade-offs. There's trade-offs, and typically what all this is predicated upon is you making some sort of deal or partnership which is beneficial to you, which might make you give you a leg up over your rivals, i.e., your neighbors. Okay, but over time, when you get a situation where each nation is being, you know, partnered with another nation from another continent, then what starts to happen is that when you move away from that continent and then you go into the halls of, say, the UN and other groups of nations who largely get together and negotiate how they're going to peacefully divvy up resources. Okay, you then become the proxy, and you don't have any power. You don't have any agency at that point. And that's where a lot of these African nations largely find themselves. You know, it's kind of like, okay, well, what do we do if, you know, the Chinese come in? Well, what do we do if the Arabs come in? What do we do if the Europeans come in? It's like, well, shit. In 2019, this is pretty much what you got because of shit. The last 30, 40, 50 years of how African nations have decided to go about dispute settlement, infrastructure development, or lack thereof, a whole number of scenarios. I mean, one has to actually take a step back and kind of look at themselves and say, okay, well, how did we get to this point where we essentially, none of us have agency. You can look at your neighbor, and even if you don't like your neighbor, what both of y'all are gonna have to admit to is the fact that can't none of y'all do a goddamn thing about the situation you in now, largely because of your beefing. So this is just yet another one of these things to think about when we ask, well, how is it that the Chinese can come in and do this? It's like, okay, well, we'll just look at the history. There, I mean, you haven't really shown, at least to my view, and there's probably a multitude of reasons. I'm not there on the continent, so I can't speak to it in depth. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that you've had hostilities. You can't have like a industrial sector, a robust one, mind you, that's doing global trade, and you've got civil war after civil war after civil war after war with your neighbor after civil war going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when it comes to the Sahel, though, the problem is that Gaddafi kept those areas well secure in his tenure, which is why you didn't hear anything like this happening before. You always had, you know, extremist groups, less than 100, maybe one, you know, less than 1,000 at best. Um, Gaddafi kept those guys in check with his military. That whole entire region from Libya all the way down into Nigeria, that was pretty much all secured by Gaddafi.
Right.
He provided the security for that region, and once they took him out, he warned that if you let these guys out of jail, then you know you're gonna have chaos on the continent. And he, you know, his his prophecy came to fruition, as he was taken out. As soon as he died, the factions came to power. They started killing most of the melanated people, especially in Libya. The two workers, if I remember correctly, they were the ones. They were the ones who were killed off. They were the first ones to be killed off after he died. So, and those who survived, they ran across the continent for refuge. And I think they're also being trafficked into Europe. So you see a lot of this stuff going on, mostly due to the lack of strong leadership coming out of Libya.
Yeah, I was gonna say a lot of some of those people ended up on the auction block as well.
Right.
Yep.
All right, let me get to this next article. All right, this one is from Aval News. S-400 purchase could redefine Turkey's geostrategic role. With the Turkish government pressing ahead with its purchase of the Russian S-400 defense system, the United States patience seems to have run out. A report by CNBC stated Turkey has a little more than 2 weeks to decide whether to complete a complex arms deal with the U.S. or risk severe penalties by going through with an agreement to buy a missile system from Russia. By the end of the first week of June, the report added, Turkey must cancel a multi-billion-dollar deal with Russia and instead buy Raytheon's U.S.-made Patriot missile defense system or face removal from Lockheed Martin's F-35 program. Forfeiture of 100 promised F-35 jets, imposition of U.S. sanctions, and potential blowback from NATO. The report, based on anonymous U.S. sources, was not denied. The U.S. moves, which constitute no less than a full-on threat to Turkey, were followed by another concrete measure to pressure Turkey. Early in May, the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee unveiled a defense budget that aims to ban the F-35 jets to Turkey. The proposed 2020 National Defense Authorization Act would prohibit funding to transfer the F-35 or related equipment to intellectual property to Ankara, unless the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State can confirm Turkey has not accepted the Russian system and certified they will not purchase the system in the future, official source said. These steps mark a steep escalation in the showdown between Turkey and the United States. All earlier disputes between Washington and Ankara, including those in 1964 and 1974 regarding Cyprus, pale in comparison. While those risks may have led to partial sanctions, this time Turkey's decades-long membership in NATO is at stake. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's administration obstinate attitude on the issue can be likened to a cat no longer able to unwind a ball of yarn because it has unraveled too far. Erdogan's initial push to highlight the S-400 purchase was apparently aimed at gaining leverage and a strong bargaining position. However, as with other recent moves, it seems to have backfired, causing deep damage to the foreign ministry's diplomatic arsenal. Erdogan's pro-Russian stance has emboldened the so-called Uranus flank in state structures, pushing Erdogan, whether knowingly or not, into a trap. Erdogan is also being squeezed into a corner externally, whether he chooses to soften to U.S. pressure or acquire the S-400 system. There will be consequences. To be clear, this is a terrible place to be in, wrote Aaron Stein, director of the Foreign Policy Research Institute Middle East program in Washington. However, if Ankara chooses to deepen its partnership with Russia, bad could turn grievous as legacy defense cooperation with the United States could then be called into question. Most important, the Turkish-Russian entente further undermines Ankaras' position within NATO, and therefore the very notion of collective defense and burden sharing among 29 member states. Yeah, I think I talked about this before, but not this article, but similar situation that keeps popping up. Part of this issue with Turkey is that if they want to defend themselves, then they need a strong air defense system, especially if there's going to be World War III, an all-out World War III. They don't have to worry about a naval encroachment because there will be no landing ships coming up to Turkey's doorstep anytime soon, because there's so many reefs and rocks in place to keep invading ships from coming in the first place. No U.S. warship has the ability to land on Turkey's beachheads. It just doesn't have that ability because it's so jagged. So you have to get out and actually, get inside skinnies to land on top of Turkey's shorelines. So with that being said, a strong air defense system is going to be important in case Turkey is attacked by Greece and Bulgaria and a couple of these other, NATO and former Soviet powers, in case they're given the green light to go in there and take out Turkey. The S-400 is the strongest, the strongest card that Turkey can play right now against any opposition to Turkey's sovereignty. So that being said, if they gave up the S-400 and they took that Patriot missile battery, that thing probably doesn't even work for the most part. That's probably why Germany took their Patriot missile battery out, because they was already compromised.
Yep. And it really does kind of and I mean, Turkey, whether we know this or not, Turkey is kind of like, to me anyway, they're sort of like the tipping point, right? Where does Turkey, where do they go? I think maybe on the last Geopolitics, maybe last week, Turkey came up and we brought up this whole notion of this idea that really Turkey is in a position now to make a choice. Do we go with NATO and the Western powers, or do we pivot towards Russia and China? And this yet is another one of these instances where there's a lot on the plate that Turkey has to consider, geopolitically speaking.
Do you have any comments on it?
Yeah, they forced Turkey into a really tough position, but you see, Turkey is not a European country, and they Ataturk brought them into Europe to kind of keep his country safe. That's my opinion. Mm-hmm. But I don't think with the changing atmosphere in the world now, the changing political structure, countries taking a different, realigning themselves with either with China as they see it growing, with Russia as they see it growing, and dealing with the U.S. because they have had long-standing deal with the U.S., but still they are watching the U.S. moves and are afraid of what could happen to their country. So they're kind of like moving to places where they can be kind of a little bit protected. Mm-hmm. And Turkey is doing that. It's going to be tough, but if they can hold out, if they go with Russia, they're gonna get into a position with like what Iran is in right now. Mm-hmm. And when Iran went into Syria, it really kind of sealed its fate, because in a way, Iran had to go into Syria. because it's got to protect itself. And the Iranian government really, they're forward thinking. And Turkey, this guy who is the president of Turkey, prime minister of Turkey, he's also forward thinking, but he's got Turkey. The Turks are people who you got to push them. They've always been that way. You know, they're Muslims, and with Muslim people, you have to push them to where you want them to go, and that's the way it is.
All right. This next one is from AlJazeera.com. Iraq vows to stand with Iran amid U.S.-Iran tension. Iran and Iraq have close ties through trade, culture, and religion, but Iraq relies on U.S. to combat the threat of ISIL. Iraq's leaders are vowing to stand with Iran after the United States ramped up its rhetoric against what is called the Iranian threat. Foreign Minister Mohammed Ali Al Hakim made the pledge following talks with the Iranian counterpart. Al Jazeera's Rob Matheson reports from Baghdad. So the problem with this is that Iran paid not just in money for all of this, but they also paid in blood. They want a return on their investment, and the security apparatus and posture of Iraq and Syria and Lebanon plays a vital role in all of that. So they want not to so much as colonize these places, but they need a security guarantee. And the guarantor of security in that region will be Iran and Russia and China for the most part. China will probably have more to say about Afghanistan and Pakistan, and Iran will take care of Iraq, um, Syria, and Lebanon, and Russia will take care of all of the security in the region from from Sudan, Egypt, Libya, and Central African Republic. And they're also in from what I just read is that they're in South Africa and Zimbabwe now. So this is a new shift in geopolitics that hadn't been seen before or had not been foreseen to come to fruition.
Or wasn't anticipated. Because I mean, what it only makes sense to me, right? If the U.S. and NATO forces are really going to try to push this issue in the way that they are, then yeah, conflict is going to make for strange bedfellows. So you have two countries who were, and we can kind of reference it to what we were just talking about with nations in Africa, right? That have largely been co-opted and proxied to the point where they can't actually work cooperatively together because they have interests with other countries and other nations. Now, this whole thing that you're talking about with Iraq and Iran, okay, this is one of those instances where now you're avoiding that type of scenario. They say, look, we've been at each other's throats for years. Yeah, we get that. But bigger picture, like you see what's going on here, it'll be strategic for us to actually be partners at this point.
Go ahead, D.
You're talking about the bigger picture, and when you said that, it reminded me of something. For me, I would say, look, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And if Yemen and Oman, these people, if they stay separate, if they don't form some kind of cooperative, they're going to be picked off one by one, just like how the U.S. picked off first Baghdad, then Afghanistan, then it moved to Syria. Just how that happened, it will happen again. So they should form some kind of cooperative, Because what not only before you had Israel and to some point Saudi Arabia, before Saudi Arabia were just using its money to manipulate the situation. Now it's using weapons. It's buying the weapons, and it has become the proxy to start the wars. Israel is using the Saudis to go after other Muslim countries. Israel can't do it itself, so it's using the Saudis. So if they have to keep Iran from the kind of like pulling all these nations together.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I see it. But you know, I could be wrong. But it looked very much like that. Israel can't do these proxy wars to keep the U.S. no longer has the power, the military ability to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So they got Israel there. That Israel has always been the one who stirred the pot. So now Israel is saying, well, you know what? We got to get Saudis to fight the wars now that the U.S. can't fight there now. And that's what's happening. And the Saudis can't attack Iran head on. So they're attacking the other little nations around.
Well,
Now, D, would this be the reason why Trump pushed through an $8 billion arms sale to the Saudis here? I think it was like, yeah, okay. And it was against, there was no congressional approval or nothing. I forgot what sort of powers he did this under, but it was like $8 billion in arms sales.
Well, the president they gave, after 9/11, they gave the president a lot of power. You guys may not realize that, but
yeah,
the president of the United States got a lot of power
executive orders.
Right.
Anyway, before they used to fight over these executive orders. Now you don't see any fight. Congress don't object to it at all. You know, but what was happening is that like I said before, that they had made a deal with the Saudis. We are going to protect you, but the Saudis saw in Iraq and then in Libya and then in Syria, that's not going to be possible. So now they had to give the Saudis weapons, and this young king that they put in there, he's following their instructions, but he doesn't know what he's getting into. It's like the guy we were just talking about in West Africa, Sierra Leone. You know, when you in a position of power and you don't really grasp what you're into, you got a lot of problems. And this guy in Saudi Arabia don't know what he's doing. He don't know what he's getting into.
Well, keep in mind that Saudi Arabia needs all of those arms because they were a fragile state.
Themselves, right? Yeah.
Right, the
Yeah,
state is fragile, and without some form of military defense, they are very susceptible to complex. There's a lot of feedback coming from you.
Okay, hold on.
see, look, all the nations on that peninsula are from the house of Saud. Saud was there. It is the father, the grandfather of all the kings and princes and all that of all the nations on the Saudi peninsula. And what has happened is that, except for one really, they're trying to get him in line, and the Saudis went after him a couple of years ago. But all these people, the Saudis never had a problem protecting themselves. It's the U.S. who made them a deal, said we will protect the oil, but everybody else in the area got oil. So if they were allowed to sell their oil on the market just like the Saudis do, nobody would be fighting with the Saudis. But what's happening is that they want the Saudis to control the market in that area. So it's like Guyana, for instance. Guyana's got oil everywhere, but you can't pump it out. Cuba has got the same problem. Haiti can't pump the oil. Why? Control over the oil.
Right.
So what Saudi is facing is that their oil production at some point is going to start tapering off.
And
And
in the United States, they're charging Saudi Arabia, MSRP on these military engagements and weapons. So the Saudis aren't getting a discount. They're actually paying top dollar
They're paying
for
full price.
they're paying top dollar for all this equipment and training, and they can't even beat a few hundred guys on the ground in sandals and turbans wrapped around their heads. So that should tell you, the scalability of Saudi Arabia's military, that they really don't have any. They have to rely on mercenaries from Colombia and Central America. They have to rely on, rogue African soldiers who defected or who have been a part of some kind of private military organization
Mercenary group, yeah.
to go in there and handle, the situation on the ground in Yemen. And then don't forget that they also put a blockade against Qatar. The blockade has not been lifted.
I was going to say, now wait a minute. That's interesting because that did happen, and if I recall, so Qatar has the largest natural gas deposits on the planet, right? That's kind of like Qatar's thing. Is I think it's LNG or what? I'm trying to remember what type of gas it
LNG.
is. Yeah, LNG, natural gas. They have their unique corner on a energy market, not like the energy market or energy sector as a whole. But when it comes to LNG, Qatar is the king, this little tiny small nation. So the blockade was now, Mike, if you could refresh my memory, man. Qatar came out. This is some months back, and they actually kind of maybe broke away from that sort of the stance that's in that region.
They left
And I
OPEC.
think, yeah.
Yeah, they left OPEC, and now they don't have any further outside, involvement because they weren't making money in OPEC anyways. The money was coming from the gas, wasn't coming from the oil. So for what it stands for, at the very least, it was a strategic move on their end, but it also tells you how weak OPEC is in its current position. I mean, as the Qataris are leaving, the Russians were stepping in. So Russia is controlling not just the security aspect of the Middle East, but they're also controlling, willing to control or play with the oil sector as well. So the energy sector is also a big deal. The problem is that Qatar can't really get their gas to Europe in the way that they wanted to by putting a pipeline through Syria. Not going to happen.
Right.
You got the South Stream pipeline coming from Russia to Turkey, and then you also have, Syria has gas deposits as well, right down in the, if I remember correctly, right down in the Golan Heights. However, Israel is occupying that area.
Right. And then in the news, and Let's Be Frank has a question also, so I wanted to read that off too. But
Cool.
in the news recently, the Nord Stream pipeline has now been in the news, and there's like a snag with this whole thing. Have you heard anything about that also?
Say that one more time. Your mic broke up.
Oh, the Nord Stream pipeline?
Nord Stream goes to Germany.
Right. So if you've noticed that there was some sort of kind of discontented talks with regards to German and U.S. relations here. I think maybe it was about a week ago.
Because Trump wants to sell expensive gas from the United States into Europe. Why would the Europeans pay more to get less?
Because it's the American way.
Well, the idea is to cut Russia off from Europe, so that Russia cannot supply energy to Europe, because Europe is dependent upon Russian energy coming in at very cheap prices. So Russia could have solved this a long time ago. If Russia wanted to bring NATO to its knees and actually disband NATO, all they have to do is wait till the wintertime and cut off the gas flow through Europe right in the middle of winter, and let the fucking Europeans freeze to death. Once they get frostbite, they'll come to the negotiation table and say, okay, no more NATO, and that would end all of this stuff. Pain is a motivator.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. Isn't it? Well, let me get this. Let me find the question that Frank had. Let's see here. He said, "Oh, wait. Here it is. Don't forget that Persia included Iran, Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Tajikistan. There are tens of millions of Persian language group speakers outside Iran. West doesn't understand this."
Mm-hmm. He had a question before that as well.
Okay, let me see. Oh, yeah. Have you brothers read? Okay. I told them we were going to circle back around to this in the free chat because it has to do with the rare earth minerals angle that China is considering to take in the trade war, and how that plays into why the West wants to take Iran down, because Iran has now started talking about refining rare earth minerals as well.
Because they have a lot.
Yep.
What exactly they have, I don't know, but they have a lot of minerals in those mountains over there. So
let's be frank. We were just talking about the same thing. That from all the way from Syria to Pakistan, they should unite to avoid them being picked off one country at a time or one community at a time. Because actually, Persia is not wholly one nation. That whole area is not one people. You would have Arabs and what they call Saudis, and then they call Syrians, and they call different names in different countries. So it's once you have a nation functioning as one, which is how Iran is functioning right now, or Pakistan, or Syria, they try to break it up. They try to break up Iraq. So you got if before, when Saddam was in power, he kept the nation together, albeit his group was in charge. But once you have your nation stabilized, and you're able to do more in stable society than you are if if your neighbor is having problems, then you're gonna have problems too in your country. Your country is going to be destabilized. So they have to fight. They have to get together and form a community or a bloc, which will kind of protect each other border and each other country. As you can see, when Iran went into Syria, it helped liberate Syria. If Iran didn't help, Syria would still be fighting. You know what I'm saying?
No, they would have lost. They would have lost.
Right. So you have to, and you get picked off like how the Saudis are doing in Yemen. Yemen is out there alone. If Iran don't help the Yemenis, guess what was going to happen?
The way you fix the Yemen issue is that the African Union steps in and says, no more to this. We're gonna have to figure this out. But in terms of Iran, you see that Russia has let Iran take the lead on the Caspian negotiations, because for a while it's been debated whether or not the Caspian Sea is a sea or a lake. In reality, it's an actual big ass lake, and probably one of the biggest lakes in the world, because a sea is a body of water that's connected to an ocean, right? The ocean is the main body of water. It's not connected to anything. It's just a bunch of water sitting in the middle of 5 states: Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, if I remember correctly, or Turkmenistan. Iran shares a border. Russia shares a border, and I think that there's a fifth country. I want to say it's probably
Kazakhstan.
Afghanistan.
Kazakhstan.
Yeah, Kazakhstan. You're right about that. Thank you. So you have these countries that just ratified this a few months ago to provide security over that area. So that means that's a no option. That's a no-fly zone for anybody who thinks they're going to come through there, and that includes trying to attack Iran, because Russia has corvettes, ships in that area, some of the best corvettes in the world, that have launched missiles from the Caspian all the way into Syria, which is a long way. So those are small little ships that can actually pack a punch. And then you factor in the flight path that goes from Russia all the way down into Iran. That's a complete safe zone for both Iran and Russia and Azerbaijan, because if Azerbaijan has to, if their security is compromised, they will be pulled into the fight as well for Iran.
But wasn't there also an energy pact that was done with all of the stand nations along with Russia maybe like about 5 or 6 months ago?
Yeah.
So I would also imagine that there's some sort of element or some sort of low-level security pact within all of that as well.
Well, they wanted, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they wanted to maintain the Soviet Union, even though Russia was like, no, let's move on from that. And they were like, no, let's actually keep the Soviet Union going. So a lot of them have an allegiance to Russia, but
Right.
China has been undermining that whole entire operation or that relationship by coming into with this Belt and Road Initiative. So Russia is starting to feel the pressure, but there's a lot of rich resources in that area that everybody wants to get their hands on. But the security in the area is pretty tight for the most part. All right, let me get to the next article. All right, this next one is from CNBC News, or CBS News, sorry. Here's how Russia is advancing a post-West order, says foreign policy expert. Russia's efforts to maintain the appearance of a neutral arbiter in the conflict-ridden Middle East and its instrumental approach to ties with Beijing have helped it project outsized geopolitical clout. Despite its aging population and ailing economy, says foreign policy expert Angela Stent. Under President Vladimir Putin, Russia has returned to the Middle East in probably a more successful way than the Soviet Union was ever there. Now the director of Georgetown University's Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies said, under Putin, Russia hasn't chosen sides. Stent told CBS News senior national security contributor Michael Morell. The Russians are now the only power in the region that talks to all sides in all disputes, to Iran and the Shia groups, to all the Sunni states, and of course Israel. It's very pragmatic. It's not ideological, she said, adding that posture has helped Moscow solidify partnerships with both Tel Aviv and Riyadh, two of the United States' closest allies. The U.S. obviously much more powerful than Russia, and Russia can't replace the U.S. militarily or economically in the Middle East, Stent said, but the U.S. is not seen as a neutral arbiter. In an interview with Morell on his weekly podcast, Intelligence Matters, sounds like a white version of the Brain Trust, Stent said Putin has also cultivated instrumental ties with China, including greater military cooperation in an effort to advance mutual interests in a complementary worldview. These are two countries that feel that the post-Cold War order hasn't taken their interests into account, and that they need to have more agency in it, Stent told Morell. And they are both committed to what they call a post-West order. Russia's meddling in neighboring Ukraine, its involvement in the years-long war in Syria, and its attempt to influence political standoff in Venezuela are areas where Stent said it had managed to assert some interest at close to minimal cost. So they are able to project military power on the cheap, fairly successfully, particularly in areas where they are surprising the West or where the West doesn't want to respond, she told Morrell. Sten said Putin, known to have drawn formative and broadly applicable lessons from his training in judo and his his experiences in the Soviet security services, those skills, she explained, helped him take advantage of the distraction of the West. In other words, Russia, she said, where the per capita GDP is less than that of Italy, which has a declining population, a crumbling infrastructure, very limited resources, making pretty savvy use of those resources to reassert Russia. I don't know if I agree with the last statement that they have crumbling infrastructure. Last time I checked, their metro system is top notch in comparison to anything in the United States. Their healthcare system is very comparable to that of most European countries, and their information technology sector is pretty strong for a country that's isolated. So I'm not sure if I agree with that assessment that Russia is some kind of like failed ruined state that's sitting in chaos. I don't see the evidence of chaos anywhere.
Look, if Russia was a failed state, okay, you wouldn't have a motherfucker like Putin doing what he's doing, right? With the support of the people. Like nobody from a failed state like gets out here and makes the kind of moves that Russia makes. No one from a failed state is able to arm other nations. No one from a failed state doesn't pull together other smaller nations and make energy and trade blocks. Okay, like that doesn't make any sense.
To me, the only problem that Russia has, I mean, when I say problem, yes, they got problems. They have every problem that normal nations have, but their biggest problem is population. The population of Russia is too small, and the aging population. So they have to get the population growing, and they have to put the population in places where they can get the resources out of the ground. Because Russia's is equal almost in resources to Africa. They have the kind of gas fields that that probably the Sahara, I would say, across the northern tip of Africa, they haven't developed the gas fields yet. And gas and water underneath the sand is going to be, if they can pull it out, whoever owns that is going to be wealthy. So Russia lacks a population, and it lacks the ability to get its resources out of the ground, especially, and they're trying to move north, really close to the North Pole. In that area especially, gas and oil and other resources are plentiful if Russia can take them out, and they need a population to do that.
Yeah, they have a problem with their navy as well. Their sailors and submariners are actually over 50 years old, which is a big problem because those guys are going to age in the next 2 or 3 years. I don't know how long they can stand on those warships and those submarines. They have to rotate those guys out, and what it looks like, they don't really have any future replacements for those people. At least not at this point.
Well, Mike, isn't that why with these new class of Russian subs that we've been speaking on and reporting on? I mean, that's why they incorporate a lot more artificial intelligence. The crews they don't need as many people on them,
right,
and stuff like that. In order to deal with those, those types of things there. let's be frank. Also mentioned, he says, well, Russia sells, space rockets and components to the United States. So how could they be a failed state? Damn good question.
I think they're failed. What they're measuring is that they're failed in comparison to the West, right? So Western economies tend to be a lot stronger because they, the markets in those areas, whereas Russia doesn't really have a strong market outside of Russia either. I mean, yeah, they sell energy to Europe and they sell a lot of military arms, but they don't really do anything post, those two markets, those two vertical growth markets. They tend to stagger around, if not, they're non-existent in the technology market for designing their own smartphones. They don't. There is no Russian equivalent to Huawei.
Right, right. But at the same time, Mike, I think the West and in particular the United States has very interesting and creative ways on how we analyze and view markets, right? And the strength or weaknesses of said markets. Russia, on the other hand, may view its position based on a number of factors that we don't necessarily have to consider. So DE said, for example, okay, a decreasing population, right? A population in terms of, like, say, it's technical and military expertise. You have a lot of older gentlemen working, not as many younger men coming in to fill these positions, which then makes their military reliant more upon like artificial intelligence and stuff like that. See, so there's a whole bunch of determinant factors, right, that kind of shape and mold what the Russian market is made of. So doing a sort of like a face-to-face comparison of, say, like the United States economy versus the Russian economy, and then just saying, oh, well, based on how we look at markets, Russia's a failed state. Versus, and this kind of goes into where our little spat with an individual who will remain unnamed, who goes around YouTube bringing us up. When we talk about looking at the markets, there's a multitude of angles to look at it. There's some ways where you can look at market data and it says, yes, the U.S. economy is strong and robust. And then there's other angles where you look at the U.S. economy and people are saying, look, we are fucked. Take your pick. I just think that, just making that sort of determination about another country's markets based on your criteria and your market data, it's kind of like a half truth. It really is. So, that's just my take on it.
Yeah, Damiette had a question in the chat. When you say taper off oil production, you mean peak oil? I think he's talking about complex.
Wait, did I mention peak oil? Wait, what was the question again?
Damiette says, when you say taper off oil production, you mean peak oil.
Was I speaking to that?
Yeah, you were talking about Qatar and natural gas in their oil.
No. Hold on. I was just speaking to just Qatar itself, and it being the leader in natural gas production on the planet. Not necessarily them tapering off any oil. I don't know what Qatar's position is with regards to oil production. Yeah, no. I wasn't referencing like peak oil with regards to Qatar. No.
Go ahead, D.
I think a lot of people are still looking at Russia, and when they see Russia, they see the old Soviet Union. They don't see the changes that are currently taking place.
Exactly.
They're still looking at Russia the way the U.S. kind of the information that the U.S. put out. I don't know, from the 1950s to even now. of this
They
backwards,
still think Gorbachev runs it.
right? You know,
Yeah,
but
some guy with some dirt on his forehead.
the problem is that whereas before the Soviet used to run everything from Moscow, but Putin comes in and say, look, okay, Azerbaijan, you run your own economy, and you contribute to the 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 cooperative, as the Russian call it. You know, you run your own economy. You're a country. You're running your economy. You trading with Russia. You trading with China. You trading with Africa or whatever country you want to trade with. You make the decision on what you're going to develop your country. Russia is going to make the decision, but we're going to form a cooperative that we're going to trade with each other. You know, that's the way it is now. The old Soviet Union, you know, we plant uh, grains in say around the Black Sea, you know, and then we pump oil from out of the north. But it's not going like that now. You know, they are very technical skilled now, and they're developing more technical skills. They're moving into the fourth industrial revolution with the same gusto as the Chinese and the US.
All right, let me get to this next article from CNBC.com. China is indicating that it will never give in to the U.S. demands to change its state-run economy. As trade talks between U.S. and China increasingly center on Chinese treatment of foreign companies, Beijing says major American complaints about structural aspects of its economy are running up against its core interests. The implication, those matters are not up for negotiation. Previously, the vague core interest term was generally understood as referring to Beijing's territorial claims, such as those on those of Taiwan. But a commentary piece published this weekend by state news agency Xuna or Xena, sorry, emphasized that China will not yield to its prerogative about how to manage its economy. The Chinese language article published Saturday claimed there were 5 ways in which U.S. is harming the growth of global economy by launching a trade war with the Asian giant. As the negotiating table, U.S. government has made many arrogant requests, including restricting the development of state-owned enterprises, the commentary said. According to CNBC translation, obviously this is beyond the field of scope of trade negotiations and touches upon China's fundamental economic system. This demonstrates that behind the trade war the U.S. has launched against China, this is an attempt to violate China's economic sovereignty and compel China to damage its own core interests, the article said. China's giant state-owned enterprises control strategic industries such as energy, telecommunications, and defense. Since those companies benefit from favorable policies and subsidies, foreign companies complain of an unfair advantage. The escalating trade dispute between the U.S. and China has forced the coerced surrender of proprietary technology, and the trampling of intellectual property rights. Critics say China has been able to benefit economically from joining the World Trade Organization in 2001 without following through on commitments to reduce state control. For its part, Beijing has made some effort to increase the role of the market and economy and allow foreign companies greater access, but many outside observers say it's too little, too slowly. So,
Oh God, that's funny.
you want to take a swing at this?
Yeah, I'll take a swing at it. I mean, you know, look, you go to China, you say, hey, look, I want you to mass produce all my shit. French, they go to China, mass produce our shit. The UK, mass produce our shit. Everybody goes to China, mass produce our shit. China says, okay, well, you know, we do have to deal with things like pollution and all these other things that come along with producing your shit at, you know, pennies on the dollar. We don't care because we want to make a profit. If this is the deal that you guys want to make, then fine. And they make the deal. Uh-oh.
What happened?
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know if you guys can hear me. My Bluetooth headset just went off. So they make the deal. And then over time, what you'll find is that China actually had a series or a set of contingencies, right? In order to deal with like the effects of doing a lot of the manufacturing for the planet. And they enriched themselves and they had a plan and they had a vision. And this vision, as we've spoke on previous hangouts, involved a 250-year plan for what they were going to do if they took on this massive global project. And so now you're starting to see the inroads that they're going to be making with all of this. Okay, we see the whole Huawei thing. We see we see the whole. You don't even hear about the EV part of the trade war issue that's going on. That's largely just being left out of the media altogether. But the bottom line here is that China took a bet and the bet paid off. And now everybody is basically saying, well, it's not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair that you guys are enriching yourselves like this. They're like, well, we're producing everything for everyone. Why wouldn't we?
Miss D.
What complex just say? I mean, it's exactly what happened. Because what all these manufacturers did, they picked up their factories, moved them to China, and they went from paying their workers maybe $15, $20 an hour to paying a Chinese worker $2, $1. And guess that $19 difference in the pay plus the cost of manufacture here in the U.S. they were keeping. Look at Apple. Apple manufactured a iPhone for $150, charged $1,000 for it. If they manufactured in the U.S. and it costs $300 to manufacture, then they will be making maybe $500-$600 on the phone. But if
They make 96% profit on their phones.
On their phone. So you know what I'm saying? So they started out making that much money. And now the Chinese are saying, you know what? We want to cut to that. So guess what? Everybody's now start complaining.
And it could actually, yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just gonna say that China, Apple was feeling the pressure coming from Huawei in terms of phone sales. So that's why Apple decided that, well, we're not going to report any more sales per quarter and annually for the iPhone. Well, guess what? It's because a company named Huawei is on your backside giving you hell with the amount of phones they're pushing out. There's a company called Samsung that is giving you hell with all the phones they push out there. So Apple is not seeing any growth, and China is playing a significant role as to why you're not getting that sort of growth, because they have an alternative product that is half the price of yours and does the same exact thing.
And in some instances, based on who you're asking in terms of the reviewer, the Huawei shit is actually a better product than the Apple product.
It is. I have a Huawei phone myself, and it's actually pretty decent. I always thought it was going to be crap, but that thing is really, really good. The screen quality is good. The speed is good. The performance as well. I for the most part don't have any complaints about it.
I don't know if you guys remember what the U.S. did with Japan. They pushed Japan into the position that it is in right now, because Japan used to manufacture everything either in Japan or in other nations in Southeast Asia like Korea or Philippines, and they shipped it to the U.S. Then the manufacturers in the U.S. started complaining. and they got the U.S. government to put pressure on Japan to stop, take its hand out of the economy. And guess what happened to Japan? It didn't survive, and now Japan's economy is just barely bumping along on credit, just like the U.S. is now.
Yeah, they never recovered from the '90s.
They're still in that recession, aren't they?
Recession. Yeah, they never recovered. I don't think they ever will recover due to the aging of their population, as well as the shift of production and innovation to China. Now, I have heard talks about Japan, offering technology to Vietnam to try to dig inside China's underbelly in terms of supply chain manufacturing. So that could be very interesting in the coming year and a half, if they can actually shift a lot of technologies or open up the technology portfolio to someone like Vietnam. If Trump wants to really, really play this role and play this game, he would go to Vietnam. He would open up a technology portfolio to the Vietnamese and say, here, you take this and you do what you can with it, and put a thorn in the backside of China. What Trump should have done, and I think Obama made an attempt to do it, but he kind of dropped the ball on it too. They could threaten, China with possible F-35 fighter jets to Vietnam. That would be a thorn in the backside of China. That would be an economic chaos for China as well, because China needs to get the oil or the energy resources out of the South China Sea in order to maintain future production for the next 50 years. And because if there is any sort of disruption between Iran and Russia, then that will be their fallback. And because they haven't gotten it out yet, and Vietnam also has claims to it, Vietnam doesn't have a way to assert itself militarily because it can't afford warships. It doesn't have maritime operations that are comparable to that of China. And so they can't even interrupt China's trade routes if they wanted to. And they don't have air superiority at all. These are areas that if Trump wanted to really play the game well, they either using Israel or another, or Japan for that matter. We read an article a couple months ago about Japan wanting to sell off its F-16, F-15 fighter jets that was left over. I think they have probably about 100 of them, if I remember correctly, that are in working condition. They could easily sell those off to Vietnam to be a thorn in the backside of China.
Mike, not just Vietnam, but you got the Philippines.
Oh yeah,
Malaysia. All these nations that China actually are afraid of those nations. I'm not kidding. China tried to avoid conflict with Vietnam at all costs. I'm not kidding. That's if China involved in one war in Vietnam in the current, when was it?
1979.
79. Yeah, but they try to avoid war with Vietnam. The only way they're pressing Vietnam now is because their military, especially like you said, the Navy, is stronger than Vietnamese. But if the U.S. and its allies, Europe and Japan, had like even the F-15s, F-15 is a major challenge would be a major challenge to the Chinese. If the Philippines had it, Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam had it, China couldn't push them around. And if they had the manufacturing that the U.S. put into China, if they put them into Malaysia and Philippines and Cambodia and Thailand, it would build up these nations, make them stronger, that they wouldn't have to depend on China. So there's a way of going around this thing, but we are not using our heads. Our government is not,
Instead of worrying about Turkey selling Patriot missile batteries to Turkey, what they should do is take that same Patriot missile battery and put it inside Vietnam, put it inside Hanoi. That'll make the Chinese raise their eyebrow and say, let's rethink this. I mean, China has the HQ-9 surface-to-air missile system. I think that's basically the equivalent of a Russian S-300A or S-300A or Alpha variant of their missile system. So Vietnam could actually be, if the Trump administration plays their cards right, they could actually do this without firing a shot at China. All right, let me get to this next article so we can open up for open mic. This next one is from CNN.com. China rages against Bolton meeting with Taiwan as an anti-invasion drills begin on the island. The Chinese government has slammed Washington for engaging with Taipei and ordered the Trump administration to cease diplomatic engagements with the island after a highly unusual meeting, a public meeting between top officials from the U.S. and Taiwan. In May, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton met with one of Taiwan's top defense officials, National Security Council Secretary General David Lee, who was visiting the U.S. Taiwan's official news agency CNA said it was the first meeting between the top security advisors of both governments since 1979, when Washington severed formal ties with Taipei. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lu Kang said Monday that Beijing deplored and strongly objected to the meeting and urged the U.S. to stop having official exchanges or upgrading substantive relations with Taiwan. Taiwan and China were separated at the end of a bloody civil war in 1949, and officially the U.S. only has official diplomatic relations with Beijing. The One China principle is the political basis for China-U.S. relations, Lu said. We are firmly against the U.S. engaging in any official contact with Taiwan in whatever form and under whatever pretext. We also stand resolutely against any attempt to create two Chinas or one China, one Taiwan. This is our clear and consistent position. In the China and U.S. as China and the U.S. engage in a tense trade war, however, Washington has been building closer ties with Taiwan, the island that China views as a renegade province. On Saturday, Taiwan announced it had renamed its unofficial embassy in Washington from the Coordination Council for North American Affairs to the Taiwan Council for U.S. Affairs after discussions with Washington. That marked the first time a Taiwan government organization had been renamed to include words Taiwan and U.S. Really got to love the new name, Taiwan Foreign Minister Joseph Wu said on ministry's official Twitter. And in March, Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen announced she wanted to purchase advanced new weapons from U.S. President Donald Trump's administration. Beijing's comments came as Taiwan began its annual Hong Kong exercise on Tuesday. The military drills are aimed at ensuring the island's readiness for an invasion by Communist China's People's Liberation Army. President Tsai watched as the Air Force landed F-16V aircraft on a highway in eastern Changhua County as an exercise designed to test the military's refueling and rearming capacity if major airfields on the island were occupied or destroyed by the PLA. This is interesting. I didn't know they made that sort of name change. Not that it's that significant, but it's interesting position to take. I don't know. You would think that maybe it's a bit risky, but Japan would actually bolster up Taiwan, as a buffer up to China's doorstep. Not that I think that Japan would actually use leverage, the island to launch an attack, but you would want to make sure that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So therefore, let me make sure that my friend um, is stronger than its opponent as well. But it doesn't seem to be the case. What do you think about that, D?
I'm not sure they can use Japan because Japan has got a very bad reputation, and they seem not to want to fix it because in World War II, Japan, I mean, did a lot of things to Korea, Chinese, everybody that every country that they invaded, they left a bad taste, they left a bad reputation. The U.S. and its allies should kind of like, instead of having just Japan and Taiwan in the area, should build up all the other economies in the area. Because if these countries are strong, they will not rely on China. It's because of their weaknesses that they rely on China. They can't object when the Chinese say do something if China support for their economy is more than what the U.S. support for their economy is, and what the U.S. has long been doing is, which like the British, the same thing. You do what I say, or I'm gonna get rid of you. Meaning the leadership. So the leadership has to stress out their country's people in order to follow what the U.S. want. And China comes along and say, look, here's a few $1 billion. We want this, and you can do what you want with the money. Guess what the people do? What the leadership do? They follow China. And the U.S. The only thing they have to have is Taiwan. Even when Taiwan come and say, look, we want the F-35. No, you can't have it. But we'll give you something that you can't even fight China with.
Well, wait. Let me just backtrack a few minutes ago. Now, Mike, you mentioned something about the Japanese selling off their older fighter jets. Was it to Taiwan? Was it or to Vietnam?
He said Vietnam.
Vietnam. Well, a plan like that would make sense because I just recall a couple of days ago reading something. I just looked it up now while we've just been discussing this, and yeah, it actually kind of makes a lot of sense now that Mike mentions that, because Trump just sold 105 F-35 fighters to Japan. So what to do with all these old fighter jets, right? That we just purchased these new ones that are going to replace these old ones.
Well, it's not uncommon for a country like Japan to actually have strong air superiority in regards to their lack of naval superiority, right? They don't have a strong blue water navy in comparison to the Chinese, so they would have to dominate the air against China because China has about fucking 3,000 fighter jets. So you need to match up against them, or come up with a very strong air defense system, which I think the Japanese has the the Patriot missile system, but a 100 F-35s is exactly what you're going to need to take out all of those old Soviet built aircraft that the Chinese have, that they're willing to waste those aircraft if they have to.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find that article because we covered this before. But
the U.S. I don't think the U.S. tend to think of long-term consequence of things. You know, it doesn't appear to me that way at all.
mhm.
The Chinese would make a plan for 100 years. The U.S. would make a plan for 20
minute.
years, 30 years, but not 100 years.
This is the article I was referring to right here. We covered this back in April. Japan plans to sell off 100 of its homebrew F-15J Eagles to pay for more stealthy jets. So this is what I was referring to. You if you if Trump wanted to broker a deal like this to the Vietnamese, that would be a thorn in the side of the Chinese, like they've never felt before. The last thing they want is a strong military right on their doorstep. That's not North Korea, right? North Korea has nuclear weapons, but they're not competent enough to actually use them. But a strong non-nuclear power like Hanoi could really annoy the backside of the Chinese that like they've never felt before. So, because they don't have the capability to match up with something like this at the moment. Or yeah, they have the J-21 or the J-22 fighter jet, but it's not. It hasn't been tested in combat. These F-15s have been tested in combat, so they're pretty thorough for the most part. Let me read the first paragraph of this so we can get an understanding of what is being said here. Japan has the largest fleet of F-15 Eagle fighters outside the United States. This is key. The powerful twin-engine fighters combine high-speed, potent radars and heavy fuel and weapon loads to play a critical role patrolling the expansive seas around the Japanese archipelago. However, with tensions with China and North Korea on the rise, the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force is looking to pawn off the older half of its Eagle fleet to pay for. D, you have a lot of feedback, brother. Is looking to pawn off the older half of its Eagle fleet to pay for over 100 new F-35 stealth fighters, even if they aren't optimized for the same role. Japan's F-15Js and F-15DJ two-seater trainer are the only models of the legendary jet built outside the United States, though an initial few were built in McDonnell Douglas St. Louis plant. In the mid-1970s, Japan arranged for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries to license manufacture a domestic model of the F-15C air superiority fighters along with its F-100 turbofans. Unlike the later Mitsubishi F-2, a heavily altered Japanese variant of the F-16, the F-15J had only minor differences from the F-15C. Because the United States was unwilling to transfer certain technologies, the F-15Js came with Japanese designed data links, JAPR-4 radar warning receivers, and JALQ-8 electronic countermeasure systems. They also came with racks for unguided Mark 82 bombs. Yeah, so this is what I was referring to, and it's not out of the realm that they can actually do something like this. But I'm thinking of when you think of the Trump administration, I don't know if there's too many intellectually savvy people up there. I would say that they're probably more intellectually challenged, if anything else. It doesn't seem like there a whole lot of sense making going on up there. I don't think they can put a THAAD system inside Vietnam. I don't even think that the Chinese or anybody would tolerate that right on their doorstep, right? Especially the soft side of their underbelly for security, because the Vietnamese area, or that part of the region of West China, is actually pretty weak and porous. It's just like Syria. Syria's border with Jordan, or Syria's border with uh, uh, um, with Israel. It doesn't take much to push the fence down. So if that makes any sense to you, D.
Well, look, in my opinion, what you're saying is like foreign policy in the United States being run by business people, and they run it from a business point of view, and the tactics that they're using is like what a corporation would use against another corporation. But you deal with countries, and corporations don't outlive most countries. The countries that they're dealing with today have been around for thousands of years. Yes, they've changed borders, a little bit here and there, but they've been around for thousands of years. Vietnam, Cambodia, these places. I mean, you can't go in there and make a plan for the short term of how they're gonna survive against China. You got only not only to make them survive, but you got to leave them being able to thrive in the face of China, because China's gonna keep on growing. These same countries have to keep on growing. They can't just give them a short term solution to a short term plan to a long term that requires a long term solution. So our foreign policy is bad. It's flawed from the beginning. I mean,
Our foreign policy is largely just based on resource acquisition, right? So that in and of itself is going to lend to a short-sighted view.
exactly.
So everything is kind of done in haste. It's done largely for the quick buck, right? There's no sort of long-term, thoughts with regards to long-term implications. And it really, what we have is we have a philosophy, a geopolitical philosophy of acquire it, deal with the problems later on. Because as Hillary Clinton and a few other notable politicians have been on record as saying, is that you never let a good crisis go to waste, right? See, so if something arises or some sort of problem arises in the future or not so distant future out of something that we did now, well, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because it's going to probably require some military expenditures, which means that we have justification now for budgetary, to put these exuberant budgets together and have Congress and the House just pass it through. So there's like this, albeit dysfunctional, but there's just this operating philosophy behind this, what can be perceived by a normal person as a largely dysfunctional way about doing shit. There's justification for it. The U.S. has justification for it.
This is open mic, so Ulysses, you wanted to bring something up earlier.
Oh, no. It was that was really more or less just dealing with the rare earth minerals move that the Chinese were looking to do, as a retaliatory measure, and the impacts that it would have. And let's be frank, it brought up a really good point about how a lot of components that are used in our defense machinery utilizes rare earth minerals. So I think with the Chinese kind of making that move, I mean, the average person goes, rare earth minerals, what's that? Okay, but anybody who knows how a computer's put together understands that rare earth minerals are involved.
Yeah, they could get away, with resource hoarding. I know, well, I shouldn't say I know, but there have been rumors about um, a lot of your resources on the ground in Africa have been tied up in 99-year contract agreements with China.
I would not doubt it.
I mean, that's kind of outrageous, but that's the position that they seem to be taking as a way to keep keep foreign powers from getting access to these resources without firing a shot. It's a pretty slick move, but it's also a bold move because something that's written on paper could easily be torn up. So if they're gonna, it's one thing to put something on paper, but can you defend it? And it doesn't seem like China could actually defend something like that.
I mean, whether they can defend it or not, I mean, see, that's what remains to be seen, right? I mean, it's just it's the move in and of itself, which kind of sets the tone. So it kind of makes you then have to position yourself to have to be on the offensive for someone who has maybe say signed a 99-year land lease, right? Whether it can actually be. I mean, because yeah, there's plenty of instances even in U.S. corporate law where, so for example, a contract was initially signed and then taken to court and then argued and then ultimately nullified, right? Because for whatever reason they found some sort of weakness in it, and you could rip it up and toss it in the trash. So like with all things, yeah, that's theoretical, but it's the maneuver in and of itself, right? Which makes you then have to um, formulate some sort of plan for that. Whether it can actually be executed over the span of 99 years, okay, well, we'll see in 99 years. But as of now, I know if I had a rival that I was in competition with, and they go and put a deal on the books with somebody else, and their resources, and they say they locked it up for 99 years, I'm like, fuck, okay, I gotta make a plan based on that.
Right, and what I'm saying here is that Libya had contracts with the Chinese government over oil, because at one point Libya produced the most most barrels of oil per day than any other country in Africa. I think something like 3.2 billion barrels a day were being produced in Libya.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted access to the oil because that's a very rich location for oil, as well as the trip wouldn't take long. It would just be passed through the Red Sea and then the Indian Ocean, if I remember correctly, um, and then back into China. So it wouldn't have been that long. However, those contracts were torn up once Gaddafi was killed by the Americans. So the Chinese writing this type of stuff on paper and then not taking into consideration if this is actually true. Writing this stuff into paper doesn't guarantee you anything because it's been proven before that once those contracts get torn up, they never get fulfilled again. Um,
But the point that you make though is that in order for those contracts to be ripped up and torn to pieces, Gaddafi had to be removed, right? So that was a contingency point, right? So the contract could have been contingent upon, let's just say, and this could have even been negotiated in these contracts. Let's say, okay, well, look, our agreement is contingent upon either you or someone of your cabinet or of your party continuing to be in some sort of position of power or some sort of position of influence in order to make good on this deal over the long run. If I sign this deal with you and then the U.S. comes in and kills you off and throws everybody and just sets the whole goddamn place up into chaos, I'm out. And I'll regroup somewhere else on the continent and figure it out from there. But I signed the deal with you, so I'm looking to execute it with you. And the United States comes in and takes Gaddafi out, and like I said, sends the place into upheaval. How do you execute what business plans you had in place with that government when your rival took that government out that you made the deal with?
Well, that means it forces them to actually defend against the contracts that that's the ink that is put on paper. They have to actually defend it now. Can China respond to such aggressions against their best interests? Based on what's happened in the last 10 to 15 years, I don't think that China is capable of doing that right now, or maybe even going forward, because they haven't solidified themselves in that area.
Which I'm saying, that's why it would make sense that there would be contingencies in whatever agreements that they would have made with Gaddafi at the time, because you're right, they don't have that position. See, so their deal is like this. Okay, well, we're largely looking at you to be able to secure your realm in order to make this happen. We don't have the power to do that. We can't come in and basically just set up shop and point weapons east, south, north, and west, and basically say, hey, look, this is us. We don't have the power to do that. What we can do is work with you, but you have to establish and maintain control in your region. Now, once that goes up, what recourse do the Chinese really have? Other than to just say, okay, well, that's a wash. Plan B, Plan C, Plan D, anyone? What's going on, Jay
Peace.
Charles?
Not much, man. Peace, brothers. Peace. I think what the wild card is that China did invest so much money into these particular strategic countries. So you don't think that's kind of the wild card? Like we can pull our investments out. You think that's what it is? Like as far as the intellectual resources, the other things like that Africa kind of like needs right now. As far as the technology, the building on the infrastructure, they can pull out on that. So do you think that's kind of like the wild card right there, where they got them by the hook?
Oh,
The
that's why Belt and Road came about, to secure those resources, and China knowing that they can't protect the sea lanes at the present, and why you have Russia going into Syria, because the time was right really to put pressure on the U.S. to force their hand. But before, even China and Russia couldn't do it. When 2001, China and Russia together couldn't stop the U.S. from going into the Middle East. So it didn't make sense trying. But today it's a different story. 99 years is a long time for a person, but for a country it's not. And the other thing is that, let's look at, for instance, battery technology. The what you use for battery technology today, the sources for the material have changed. I mean, even from going back to 1995 to now, 20 years down the road, sources for the batteries that we use in, no bunny walk around boom 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 anymore. The batteries in our cell phone, small battery lasts 2 days if you don't use your cell phone, depending on how you use your cell phone. So technology changes. 99 years, the Chinese, the materials that they have 99-year lease on, they probably won't be using it. So a lot of things can change.
But let's say it's 99 years, right? But we looked at China. China was able to advance and uh, supersede certain countries within what, like a 30-year span, 40-year span. So how long you think it will take Africa to or certain countries in Africa to leverage that technology, leverage the resources, and pretty much become neck and neck with China? Because obviously we know we have a population boom occurring right now. The emerging technology that's emerging from Africa right now uh, is evident, is being seen, and also they're proclaiming that they want to be one of the top top sorry, constants top. They want to lead AI, right? So obviously they got a mission, they got a goal. So if they're able to get neck and neck with China, what they really need them for? That's what I'm thinking is going on right now. Because I think what they're trying to do is leverage what they need from them, and then take that with the intellectual resources they're gonna have, as far as the new generation coming up, and the infrastructure built, they can get strong enough where they won't need China anymore. So maybe I think it's a long game, but I think somebody's gonna come out on top, and uh somebody's not gonna get all what was promised to them. Somebody's gonna get played. So that's what I think is gonna play out. But what do you think?
They, Africa would never be where China is. It's just they're two different frameworks of thoughts and culture. Politically, they're aligned, but culturally on the ground, they're vastly different. So there's a different purpose of human capital in Africa than it is for China, right? In order for China to survive, they have to work these people to death. In Africa, it's not the same. You can survive in a village for the next 100 years or the next 200 years, and no one would ever notice that you were even there. Um, so what I'm saying is, technologically speaking, they would never catch up with China because they don't have um, the same issues that China has. China has an urgency to ramp up in order to get themselves into a global position, whereas Africa is not thinking about being in a global position. They are right where they're supposed to be for what they're capable of doing.
So so pretty much you're saying that so pretty much again, it's like the same thing where, like, I think other countries are coming to Africa and taking what they need. Obviously, from Chinese culture, they want to make sure everything they do is harmonious, right? I give to you, you give to me, everything is balanced. But do you think how long do you think it's going to take for Africa to get out that cycle of countries coming in and taking resources, opposed to being more self-sufficient? Because that's the number one goal. They have enough resources to be self-sufficient, where you know uh, they should be in a power position. But what is it that they're lacking? Is just pretty much, is it more of a cultural issue, or is it more of uh, um, the infrastructure? Because obviously the infrastructure is going to be built, I think, within the next completely within the next, I say, about 30, 40 years.
Uh,
So
Well, mhm.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that when you talk about infrastructure, there are places inside Nigeria and Kenya that actually rival that of most black counties and districts in the United States. If you think about the decaying infrastructure in Chicago, in Detroit, and you think about certain places in Nigeria outside the capital, I mean, you would think Nigeria was a first world country in some of these areas. So what I'm saying here is that the way they go about modernizing the countries is really relevant to what limitations the countries actually have in terms of protected zones and you know um, save the wildlife and things like that. There's only so much they can actually do because of these hurdles. But once so in times of a time frame as to where they're going to be, I would probably say by 2035, 2040, you'll start to see some major infrastructure changes that will rival that of most predominantly black areas in the United States. Not saying that the black people are at fault for their decaying infrastructure, but the point of the matter is, if you compare where a black person lives in America versus where African lives on the continent, either now or 15 years from now, is going to be vastly different. Um, you know, if you just want to compare block for block.
Well,
Yeah,
we just have to also just look at the fact that there has to be some sort of intrinsic transfer between the two, right? So if the Chinese are going to come in, Africans have to benefit somehow. So my assumption would then be that would be with regards to say like quality or lifestyle or quality of lifestyle. Okay, these are things that because in certain areas of China it is first world, and they do produce a lot of the technology to afford this type of lifestyle. So having that transference will lend to a lot of these types of things being included or let's just say being rolled into African lifestyle. So you're going to see a bump up in terms of how things are going to be, like what Michael just said here, in some years, as a result of their interactions between the two nations.
yeah. If you look at China today, you will see that. I don't know if you guys heard of Guangzhou. It's there's a sizable population of Africans that are in China, and they are going there to set up shop, sending trading to Africa. A lot of people are going to school in China. They're going to bring home the knowledge that they learned in China, what they see in China. They're going to come home and want to replicate it because now they see that you can make money in Africa. So people from Europe, a lot of people from in the diaspora are going back to Africa because they're saying, you know what? I don't have to put up with this foolishness in London. I already got an education. Let me go back to Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Zimbabwe, wherever I'm from, and I can build a business there. And that's what they're doing. So that transfer of knowledge and technology is going to happen if Africa will stay out of the kind of wars that you see that the U.S. pushed in the Middle East. If they can stay out of those kind of wars, Africa, like Mike said, by 2035, Africa is going to be like some small town USA. They might not have the top-notch medical facilities that we have, but you're going to find supermarkets, you're going to find good medical doctors. The same thing that we have here, you're going to find, but it might not be at the standard that we as Americans would expect.
I
But
understand that. But
even with those standards, man, even with those standards are subjective, right? Because even with all of our high technological this and our high technological that and our and all of these things, right, that we have supposedly, what do we also have? We also have inefficiency, gross inefficiencies with regards to processes, right? So you could go ahead, D. Go ahead.
That inefficiency is built in because of what we call capitalism. You're working a
Bingo,
system
bingo.
you're working a system that I will I will cater to a man who can pay me $1 million, and the guy you might have, I don't know, 2 people, 3 people who will satisfy your needs. Say I'm a doctor and I got 3 clients that I'm making $500,000 a year from. I don't have to treat 20 or 34 people. So they have to go somewhere else or die. And that's the way medicine is in America. Food is in America. If the government then subsidize food, this nation we have will not exist. And in the coming years, that is going to create big problems in America. It's already starting
D.
because this trade war is pushing the price of food up.
And you know, DE, what kills me about what you just said is that essentially what you just spoke to was that no matter how you look, we all civilized societies have some level of socialism instituted in order to keep it, you know, in order for it to be what it is. Like, I know the brain trust in particular has detractors out there, and again, I won't mention his name, okay, but they have detractors out there that suggest that, you know, we in and of ourselves are socialists, but when we point these things out, gross inefficiencies with regards to infrastructure, and the differences between how a first world nation operates versus a third world nation operates, we're still looking at some level of socialism being instituted on one level or another. You know, it's just all a matter of, okay, well, is in this realm is socialism benefiting people, or is it benefiting corporations?
You know,
That's a money shot right there. That's it. Yeah.
whether it's benefit people or it's benefit corporations. Social in
Mhm.
America benefits the corporation 90% of the time. We got Social Security um because what's the name was able to force the corporation to give us Social Security in exchange for what they wanted. If we didn't have a war, we wouldn't have Social Security at all. But he used that war to get the poor people Social Security, and they never and the rich people have never forgotten that, and they've been trying for years to get rid of Social Security. The only thing that saved Social Security was the because they would get ready to privatize it and make everybody invest in. I don't know if you guys remember George Bush was trying to get all the people to invest in Social Security and Wall Street. And if that had happened when Wall Street sunk in 2009, everybody on Social Security would be walking the street today.
Yep.
All right. With that being said, we're gonna end the hangout here, and thank you all for joining us. We're gonna take a trip over to Lowcast's end of his hangout and check him out. So hit the like button if you have not already done so. Share the video if possible, and peace.